Welcome to This Week in Local, a Locology podcast featuring lively conversations about the local digital ecosystem, hosted by Locology analysts Mike Boland and Charles Loughlin.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to This Week in Local. I'm Mike Boland, and my guest today is Sharon Rowlands, who's CEO of Newfold Digital. So, Sharon, welcome to the program.
Thanks very much, Mike. I'm really looking forward to chatting with you.
Yeah, we'll have fun with this. And we're really honored to have you here as a true thought leader and also an actual operational leader when it comes to the evolving state of digital media. And we could sort of geek out about that all day on several topics. But to sort of stay focused here, we're going to zero in on some of the recent sort of Newfold moves. And particularly how those align with some broader tech trends, especially the sort of hot topic of the day, which of course is AI. So lots to discuss there, and let's get right into it. So to start, sort of at a high level, before getting into recent events and sort of product strategy, let's talk about some background. So for those unfamiliar, tell us a bit about sort of Newfold in terms of its organizational structure and any sort of figures you can provide that give us a sense of operational scale.
Okay, would love to, Mike. So first of all, Newfold Digital, we're essentially a web presence company, really fueling technology and commerce solutions for any SMB that wants to be successful in a digital world. We have about 7 million customers worldwide. We have 6,000 employees around the world, and we're about 1.4 billion in revenue. So you could really view us as one of the top 3 global players in the world. Our customers know us by some incredible brand names like web.com and bluehost.com, as well as some very regional specific brands like Crazy Domains in Australia, Big Rock in India, and HostGator in LATAM, and then some focus brands like Mark Monitor for our enterprise customers, and Yoast, which is the leading SEO plugin in the whole WordPress marketplace.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and a lot of like interlocking pieces there in sort of the web stack that continue to expand. It's been very interesting to watch all this sort of M&A activity, and particularly, as you noted, in the WordPress world, as we'll get into in a little bit. But you mentioned Yoast and Bluehost and sort of, WordPress, of course, its footprint and its pervasiveness as a platform is sort of a strong strategy. So we're going to get into that. But first, as I sort of teased, we're gonna talk a little bit about AI. Now, before we get into some of the actual recent moves that Newfold has made on that front, what's your sort of overall philosophies and strategic outlook when it comes to AI? It's obviously very hot right now. There's a lot of sort of distraction. There's a lot of fear around it. There's a lot of excitement around it. What's your sort of take, and particularly how that sort of fits into, at a high level, the product roadmap at Newfold?
Well, Mike, I think your use of the word hot is probably an understatement. Right. I mean, in the last year, look, I see a lot of, pitch decks. I get a lot of inbounds, and honestly, every single one of them has got AI in every other sentence, whether there is any AI involved in the capability or not. So it's definitely being oversold in many areas and probably undersold in others. And you're right, hype, fear. But my perspective is it's a treasure trove of unrealized potential. And I think particularly for small business owners, I think it has the capability to really revolutionize their ability to be successful, effective, and efficient in a digital world. And look, it's not going to solve every business problem overnight, but I think the potential is really very significant. I believe so strongly in it that in April, when I brought my leadership team together, which is our sort of 60 top leaders from around the world, we spent a whole afternoon talking about AI and brainstorming about how we could leverage it both smartly for our customers, but also smartly for our internal processes and making us more effective across our organization. So I'm I'm a big believer, I have to say.
Absolutely. And you're right about the sort of the pitch decks that are floating around these days. I feel like within the last 6 months, a lot of companies that were seeking funding or any other sort of function that they were using a pitch deck for, they sort of replaced the word metaverse with AI and sort of leaning into that trend. But that points to how there's a certain degree of hype around it, and then there's a certain degree of really real value there. And I think that, as you sort of teased, there are a lot of aspects of AI that speak directly to a lot of the pain points seen by SMBs, your target market, as you noted. So let's sort of go there next, and let's sort of show rather than tell. There are a few great examples recently of integrations, AI integrations that I covered, and to me seemed very logical at the time. That was sort of the theme as I was writing about it, in terms of empowering SMBs, utilizing the technology to do the parts that traditionally, again, have been pain points to them. So tell us about the recent sort of domain name generator and AI writer that were particularly integrated at web.com.
Yes, we're really excited about those two. Look, I think the most daunting thing for an SMB is getting started. You know, they're not necessarily content writers, they're not even necessarily digital natives, they know their business. And when you're staring at a blank screen, just like in the old days, staring at a blank piece of paper was really hard to get going. The way AI can just make it start for them is really, really huge. So I think with the domain generator, I think this is going to be revolutionary. Today, what happens is you're basically trawling through domain names, looking for something that fits, and you find lots of things, then you find out they're not available. Should you go with the .com? Should you go with a different type of TLD? It's really challenging for them to find the right name. So I think having AI be able to almost brainstorm for them,
Yeah.
using creativity to really find not just the best available, but the most relevant domain name that will help them stand out. And a lot of businesses just say, oh, I have to have a .com. Well, actually, not necessarily. The name is as important. And so I really see this as creating a whole new level of creativity and innovation for SMBs in how they stand out within the marketplace. And then the content generation, being able to put in a couple of keywords and then have something there in front of you that you can then, you're going to edit, you're going to get involved in, but it's going to make you so much more efficient and take that, almost that block away from you in getting going. So I think these are tremendous applications, in particular for SMBs.
Yeah. And I think the key word that you mentioned that jumped out at me was brainstorm, because it's sort of analogous to the way that a lot of artists are using sort of the visual generative AI tools like Midjourney and Dolly, where it's not necessarily taking away their creative process, but some use it for inspiration. They sort of get the creative juices flowing through this process. And I can see the same thing happening with an AI-based writer in this context or a lot of contexts. Now, with the domain name generator, another thing to underscore there, which I think is very cool, is that it's not just sort of spitting back variations on keywords that were entered, but it is suggesting things that I like to call conceptually adjacent. So synonyms, things that you might have missed or not thought of. And in that way, it ties back to that same point about it being something that, you know, is there for, you know, what it's supposed to do, but also a certain degree of inspiration to sort of start the process. Is that fair to say?
I love the way, Mike, you're using that word inspiration, because I think that is spot on. And look, you're a small business, whether you're starting up a retail store, a restaurant, a new dentist, you've got to stand out from your competition in your local market. And you need inspiration very often to do that. And so I almost see AI being that brainstorm tool that feeds them ideas that they would never have thought of.
Some of the examples are so good, I almost think it should be broadened and move further upstream, not just finding a domain name, but the name of the company to begin with. Some might be so impressed that they go back to, get a new trademark after they found their perfect domain. So I think that it's going to be interesting in that respect too. Now, the functions we just talked about are very logical, and they also seem like starting points. Were these sort of specifically prioritized for AI implementations because of their sort of starting point orientation, as we just discussed, or their sort of basic functionality that's integral to getting SMBs on the right foot? And I guess what I'm getting at there is, can we see that as a sort of mark of more functions within your overall sort of within web.com, and then broader in the family of products, integrations to come? To the extent that you can talk about it, can we look at that as a starting point?
Oh, definitely, Mike. I think the lens we always have and what we prioritize is the customer. What is going to make the customer most successful? And for most small businesses getting started, it really is getting something produced, getting an online presence, and making that presence successful. And so a key KPI that I really look at is them getting published. If they want a website, getting it published. And anything that takes away the barriers to getting published is very, very powerful for them. And I think we almost think about AI as a multiplier. It almost takes the human efforts, but it expands on them, bringing innovation, creativity, problem solving, and personalization to the equation. I think back when we merged Endurance and Web.com, I wanted to call the company something new because it was the start of going on a new journey together as an organization. It was so hard to find a name.
Yeah.
There wasn't already taken, a URL that wasn't taken. Honestly, I wish I'd had this tool myself back then. I mean, I like what we ended up with, but who knows what we could have found out. So we're really focused on understanding the problems and the obstacles of a small business in getting successful. And how can we eliminate those? How can we get them online faster? Because that is a key milestone in their digital success.
Absolutely. And that's interesting that it's something that could have been used in the generation of Newfold's name itself. Although I also like what you came up with. And also an example of human intelligence, the way that you designed the logo. Wasn't that sort of an internal crowdsourced sort of effort that came up with the logo?
Absolutely. It was very powerful because we engaged the whole organization with owning Newfold Digital. And we had a competition, and the logo and the typeface and even our color schemes were all employee driven.
Mm-hmm. So let's sort of back to the AI integrations, the ones you've made and those that you have sort of planned internally in terms of the roadmap. What are the user personas that you think will benefit most from these types of tools? We mentioned how the benefits of AI specifically align with a lot of SMB pain points. Going one level deeper, can you sort of illustrate a few sort of mini case studies or hypotheticals in terms of the way you picture this really adding value?
Sure. It's interesting. My son is thinking about starting up a new business right now himself, and it's all around men's sportswear at a whole new level that's sustainably sourced and ethically supported. And I can't share the names that he's thinking about, but he used the AI tool and came up with some incredible names. But let me give you a more generic example, right? Let's say you're a restaurant, you're in Nashville, and actually your unique food is going to be fried spicy chicken. Now, if you were going to use a traditional domain search, maybe you'd be lucky to get nashvillechicken.com.
Right.
Probably not, though. It's probably taken. You're probably going to end up coming up with a much longer URL, a descriptor. Maybe you can't have .com, but you end up with .net or some other thing. But it's not going to be creative or attractive or energizing in the marketplace. Whereas AI might come up with something like firefowl.com.
Yeah.
Think fire, spicy, fowl, another word for chicken. It's shorter. It catches the imagination. The chef in the kitchen might be really talented with his cooking, but probably writing his bio or writing about his inspiration behind his food may not be his strong suit. Again, in that situation, AI is really going to help him get started. And for anybody that's tried to use any of these tools, they're pretty darn good and very effective.
Yeah, and that's a perfect example of the conceptually adjacent function that I was referring to earlier, not just spitting back variations on keywords, but other synonyms. And that's really things that most non-writer personas would not come up with on their own. So that's very powerful. So moving on from AI, I don't want to be too AI centric because Newfold has a lot of sort of irons in the fire with its ongoing growth and innovation and product development. So what are some of the other technologies or sort of macro trends that you're excited about and sort of leaning into these days?
Okay, well, one I really would like to highlight, and you mentioned this sort of early on, is WordPress. WordPress really accounts for close to 50% of CMSs used across the globe. It is just absolutely, it dwarfs any single proprietary CMS platform. And it's really important to us. Our Bluehost.com brand is a WordPress solutions brand. And we've transitioned from being a WordPress hosting brand to being a WordPress solutions brand. And again, that's because what we see is a lot of smaller businesses, they naturally go to WordPress because they think it's going to be easy. But actually, WordPress, partly because of its flexibility, is really difficult to use and be successful with. And so we're putting a lot of effort into making WordPress wonderful by making sure it's easy, it's streamlined, it's intuitive, and we're going to be launching AI in doing that in many of the same ways that we're using it on web.com. And I really think we're going to be a force in shaping the future of WordPress and helping SMBs be much more successful with WordPress. And I think, as you referenced, a number of our more recent acquisitions have been WordPress plugins, again, to try and make the steps of being successful in a WordPress digital environment much easier for a business. Another technology that's is starting to be hyped up again, particularly with Apple news of recent, is VR, AR, and holograms, right? And I don't see them being leveraged like in the next year in SMB world, but it is coming. And particularly as businesses are trying to stand out amongst the field and differentiate, I actually think use of particularly AR in marketing campaigns and promotional campaigns, I think is really going to grow. And as it gets easier and the cost of production comes down, I think we're going to start seeing this being very actively employed across the digital spectrum. So I would say, this is going to follow closely on the heels of AI.
Those are two great examples, and I'll note both of them briefly. In that, first with augmented reality, I've studied this topic a great deal, and there are
Mm-hmm.
some large sort of undeniable advantages and ROI points when it comes to the specific use case you mentioned, which is in marketing. So dimensional
Mm-hmm.
product try-ons. It's been
Yes.
shown to boost buyer confidence to levels where there's a measurable increase in not only conversions, but another thing that a lot of people sort of miss is reducing return rates. You know, if you're an e-commerce business, to be able to reduce your return rates, it's a very expensive problem. And that's something that's resonating a lot these days because it just gives consumers a more confident purchase because they know that the couch fits or the TV fits on the wall and those types of things that those dimensional sort of augmented reality try-ons can accomplish. So that's very exciting that you're thinking about that. With respect to WordPress, I will admit my bias. I'm a self-taught front-end web developer that specializes in WordPress. And I've always thought that for the reasons you mentioned, it's such a powerful platform because it's so expansive and it's so flexible because of the open nature of the platform that's
Mm-hmm.
attracted just thousands of plugins. I always sort of test it by thinking, well, there's one random functionality I need. Let's see if that plugin exists. And I just sort of type it in. And sure enough, someone has thought of that. But the downside is that sort of makes it a little bit more advanced and there's sort of the paradox of choice that sets in. So I've always thought that the next step for WordPress in terms of innovating is to simplify and make it lower the barriers for more novices to be very powerful on WordPress. So what you said there, I think is powerful and really sort of aligns with the some gaps in the marketplace in the WordPress world.
And Mike, if I could add on to that, also in the commerce world, right? WooCommerce, I mean, there's a lot of implementations of WooCommerce as a solution. But again, the challenges of getting your store up and running,
Yep.
unless you're a techie, are really hard. So with Bluehost, we're doing exactly the same thing with WooCommerce, making it easy to get your store up and running and get you selling your SKUs across your environment. So it's a big deal. It's one of our really big initiatives across Newfold.
Yep. I use WooCommerce and I love it, but it is on somewhat of an intermediate level. So that makes a lot of
Mhm,
sense to really sort of
mhm.
onboard a larger swath of the SMB segment by just sort of democratizing it a little more. So moving on to our final question here, I want to sort of put you on the spot here because we did this discussion or a similar discussion a few years ago on sort of a previous iteration of this program. It was a Locology sort of interview AV production. Um, and one of the things that you said always stuck out to me. So I want to sort of invoke it here to see if your thinking has emboldened or evolved or changed in any way. And you brought up this concept of, if I can paraphrase it and do it any justice, sort of separating good revenue from bad revenue, which is, of course, easier said than done when it comes to sort of looking more holistically about how business affects not only the top line. Everyone seems to be very top line focused, but also the bottom line. And it comes down to sometimes making the hard decision of turning down revenue if you believe that it will be a net detriment in a long term or in a net bottom line sense. So what is your thinking on that topic? If you remember talking about it then, or if you remember this concept in terms of your thinking now?
I do remember it, Mike, and I have to tell you, my view is exactly the same. And I
Nice.
think it's being supported by the fact that increasingly a lot of public companies in this digital space are changing their strategy from spending so much money on sales and marketing because all they care about is getting subscribers to now feeling they actually have to make money in the
Right.
world. Seeing that shift, I also think the example you referenced on AR is going to be really helpful because honestly, a lot of people buy off of a Facebook and an Instagram page and then are disappointed
Yep.
with the product. And if they're able to get a better sense of this is the right product for me, it's going to be better for the business because, as you said, they won't be being inundated with returns.
Yeah.
So I am still a big believer. Look for the right customers that are the right fit for you. Do a great job with them. You'll be a successful and profitable business if you focus on getting the right customer and keeping that customer. That's how you get a return.
Yeah. And another way to sort of frame this, I guess it's just now coming to me, is it's sort of a matter, at least partially, of opportunity cost. If you are eating up resources, internal resources, on business that is, for lack of a better word, bad in terms of it will churn high or any other reason, as opposed to resource allocation that is done more optimally towards higher margin or more retentive business, it makes a lot of sense.
Well, it makes a lot of sense. But secondly, you're also fueling your ability to invest further.
Yep.
And grow your business and make your business even more successful and make your existing customers happier.
There you go.
Because you really are making sure you're allocating your dollars to the right things. For me, it's common sense. And I still, to this day, I remain quite shocked that a lot of businesses don't understand that.
Yeah. It might be the sort of some of the systems we have in place, some systems of incentive or other thing, tends to cause people to focus disproportionately on the top line, whether it be that they're quota driven, whether it be in sort of public markets and just sort of the incentives to be so top line focused. It's partially that, but also I agree with you that it's surprising that these sort of fundamentals that are so logical seem to require a contrarian voice to intelligently point it out as you have. So that's actually all the time we have, and that's a good place to end it. I want to thank you, Sharon, for spending time with us.
It was great. Lovely to talk with you, Mike.
Yeah, this was fun. Thanks, everyone, for listening. This has been This Week in Local. Stay tuned every week for more episodes. You can find the show on all major podcast networks and find out more at locology.com. Please subscribe, like, and comment. So I'm Mike Boland. My co-host is Charles Laughlin. Our producer is Dara Sweat. Thanks for listening and see you next week.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of Locology's This Week in Local with Mike Boland and Charles Laughlin. Be sure to subscribe for more.